Hey, welcome. So now we're going to talk about how to implement your tester. So you wrote your test scenarios, you've written your car classes, and so now we just need to implement the Java tester to verify that things are working. Okay, so first of all, let's go back and review our specific scenarios that we wrote. So here's the test scenario 1 that we had for the Honda Accordion, where we create the Honda Accordion for model year 2018, and then we just verify a number of things are correct. So let's go in and take a look at the code that we're going to work on. So there are a couple things. So you're going to get 3 files to start with. And I guess the most important one to look at is BCA test scenario, because you're going to be extending this. And there's a number of features in here, a number of functions. The ones I want to pay attention to most for now, there will be some others we'll look at later, are the assert equals at the bottom. And the idea of the assert equals, it's going to take an expected value and then actual value, and it'll compare them within, well, for double values, it'll compare them with a little delta, because doubles are never exact. So 3.5 and 3.50001 are essentially the same thing. So we give it a small margin for error. So that's what delta is, to say, okay, if it's within this much, we'll consider them equal. And then if they're not equal, what's the failed message that we want to print out? So basically, this is going to make sure our 2 values are equal for us. And we have this overload 3 different ways. So we have it for doubles, we have it for strings, and then we also have it for ints for doing comparisons for us. So that's going to be the main tool that we use in working on our scenarios. The other file that you have here is something called run test scenarios. We'll edit this later, but this will actually run all the test scenarios for you. And the last one is this executable that we'll see in a little while how that works. It has to do with lambdas. So our first thing is we're going to create our first test case. So let's type that in. And the naming doesn't matter so much, but I called it Honda Accordion 1 _ constructors. But I would get a number in here so there's some sort of ordering going on. And then hit OK. And I'll create it. And then we're going to extend. So we're going to do extends BCA test scenario. So now we'll have all those neat behaviors for us. And then we need to implement a specific thing called run test. So we're going to do public int run test. And it returns the number of failures. So at the very end, so we can just say return get failed count. So that's defined up at the BCA test scenario. And so that's going to return the number of failures. So if there's 0 failures, this whole thing succeeded. So if we recall what our test scenario was, it was to create the object and then just to make sure a bunch of things are equal. So let's just do exactly that. So the first thing we're going to do is create the object. So we'll do Honda Accordion, and I'll just call this C1. You'll do new Honda Accordion. And 2018. So I am following exactly what was in that Google sheet. Now I need to start doing some comparisons. So I want to say, hey, the mileage should be 0 when we create it. So C1.getMileage should be 0, so comma 0. Now mileage is a double, so it could be off by a little bit. So let's say it can be off by as much as a 1/10. And then if it fails, we're just going to put default mileage should be 0. Make this as descriptive as you can, because this error message is going to help you figure out what's wrong with your class. I'm going to paste in a couple others that you can type in as well, and then we'll talk about each of these. Okay, so I've pasted in a bunch more tests, and if you look back at the Google Doc, these are in the exact same order of them. So we'd get mileage, make sure it's 0. Get fuel capacity will be the second thing we check. Make sure it's 14.5. Again, I used 1/10. And I gave an error message that that's not correct. When we create the car, the fuel capacity should be equal to the fuel level. It doesn't matter which order you give those. And so again, the car should be full when it's created. We're going to double check that MPG is correct, 33.2. And finally, we want to make sure that the remaining range is actually the fuel capacity times the MPG. So that checks most of it. The last one, and I saved this to type in, we want to make sure that the toString is returning the correct thing, the correct value. So we can do toStrings. This is overload, so it's going to take a different number of parameters, but we should be getting 2018 Honda Accordion, and then it should be putting the mileage in there. So the mileage should be 0 at this point, and then my error will be something like toString does not match. And then once we've written this, go ahead and take the class name, just copy that, and go over to where we're running it. So let's open this thing up. You're going to go into the Run BCA Test Scenarios, and that's where this test list at the top. You're just going to append it in here. So you'll just say new, you'll type new, paste in, and you can put an extra comma here at the end. You can have an extra comma in lists in Java. So then each time you have a new one, you're just add it underneath. So this is our first test, and then when we run the tester later, it will run through all the classes that are created here. So we're going to create a second class. I'll pause the video, get it set up, but we're going to create test Honda Accordion 2. So let's continue now with our second class, which will be the Honda Accordion 2. I'm calling it driving. Again, we extend it BCA test scenario, and we create it a Honda Accord. Okay, so in our spreadsheet, the first thing we want to do is verify that driving -1 will fail. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, this gets a bit long, so we're going to be doing assert throws. So this is a new one for us. So this is where we're saying, okay, make sure an exception gets thrown. We're going to tell it the exception type that we want to check for. So it's going to be the legal argument exception, and we'll do .class. And then we're going to give it the thing that we want to execute. And so this is called a lambda function. We're going to do open close parentheses, give a little arrow, and then put a curly, and then do c1.drive open paren -1, and I'll put a semicolon after the function. Essentially what we're doing is we're writing a function inline that's taking 0 parameters. That's why inside these parentheses there's nothing. And so that's going to, we're passing a function reference here. And the last thing we will put in our error over here. So we'll just say driving mileage cannot be negative. And so what the tester will do is verify that this actually, when it runs, that snippet of code runs, it throws that exception. And now we're going to do some other things. So now we want to make sure, can we drive 30? So we're supposed to be doing drive 30 next, right? c1.drive 30. Before that, let's just check this other thing. This is not explicitly in my test case, but we're going to call it assert true. So again, this is slightly different than what we've done so far, and we'll just be saying, does can drive of 30 miles return true? And it's either going to be true or false, and then we can say can drive should be true. So that is not explicitly in our test case, but there you go. Then we'll drive 30 miles, and then after that, let's just verify that the mileage is correct. So we'll do the get mileage 30. I'm going to pause it while I paste it in. Okay, so I pasted in, we have an assert equals, and so we have get mileage, and now it should be 30 because we've just driven 30 miles. Again, with a delta of about 0.1, and then your error message. After we do that, let's go ahead and drive 200 miles, and then we'll put in another check. So we're going to drive 200 miles, and the thing that we're checking here is this should now be 230, because it should be 30. Plus 200. So this checks for the error case that it's not 200, which could be a simple assignment error. After we've done these two drives, we can also put in remaining range. So the remaining range should have appropriately gone down. So I'm going to pause it and paste that in. So I added my get remaining range, and I'm going to base it upon fuel capacity and get MPG. That would be my total range. So my remaining range should be subtract 230 from that, because that's what I've driven so far. To the extent that you can avoid too many hard-coded numbers, you'll do better, because it'll just be easy to make simple mistakes, but we're going to have some hard-coded numbers as well. Next, we're going to make sure that can drive returns the correct thing if I try to drive too far. So can drive, if I pass in 252, that should be beyond the range of the car. I did a side calculation for that. And I'll say driving 250 is too far. Right, that should fail. And then let's do the opposite of that. Let's do assert true. Driving 251 should succeed. Right, so we're going to just check both sides of the boundary condition. So that's our little edge condition that we want to make sure that just beyond it fails, just in this side of it succeeds. So let's then go ahead and do my drive. Oh, by the way, we are not checking whether this drive succeeds or fails, because it should succeed, and if it fails, it'll throw an exception anyway. And so then our tester will report that in slightly different form, but the exception will still get thrown, and we'll get to see the exception. So there's no reason to check it. And then let's check our mileage one more time. So I'll go back up and copy the mileage. So now we've done 251. So this is going to be 481. So that's kind of the total range of the car, and it'll be 481 after third drive. Again, the more explicit you make those messages, the better. And then finally, if I try to drive a little bit further, it should fail. So I'm going to copy the assert throws from higher up. And this time I'm not going to be trying to drive negative. This time I'm going to try to drive 5 more miles, because that should be beyond the range of the car. And so my error is driving on empty. So driving beyond empty should fail. Again, make that as explicit as possible, but I should not be able to drive 5 more miles. That should fail. At this point, I have finished my 2 testers. Let's add this tester into the run test scenarios. So just like we had before, we're just going to say new, paste this guy in, and construct it. You put a comma there so it's there for next time. And go ahead and run it. So right click and run. Okay, so my thing finished running, and here's the output that we're going to see. So we'll see that Honda Accordion 2 driving passed. It didn't fail anything. But Honda Accordion 1, it failed a test, and saying the 2 string doesn't match. We expected 0, and we got 0.0. This was actually an error in the requirements. So this was our mistake, your teacher's mistake in this one. We didn't specify how many decimal places to round off this 2 strings to. So let's now say that the 2 string should have the mileage rounded to 1 decimal place. We could have said 0 decimal place or 1 decimal place, but we need to be clear so that we can test this accurately. So I'm going to go back into my tester and put in 0.0. And at the same time, I actually went back and corrected my car code so the 2 string always rounds mileage to 1 decimal place, because there will be cases where it could be 2 decimal places or 3. So we need to round it to something, so we'll round it to 1. So if I put in my 0.0 and then run it again, it should succeed. So I'll run it one more time. Okay, so it ran again, and this is the case that we're trying to get to, where everything passed and it says the tester completed. In reality, you'll probably have 15 or 20 scenarios it's going to run through, and the goal is that all of them say passed. So I will put all the files from today into the Schoology assignment, so you can grab those. Good luck with writing these, and share as you create your scenarios. Test them on your own machine, then share them with your buddies in your group, so everybody has all the testers, and you can verify everybody's car implementations work. So good luck. Any questions, just reach out.